So you were two of the most scary people I've ever interviewed in all you know. Just ask you just one question because we're talking a little, here today about talent, education, getting some of this right. I'm also just interested in how things have changed over time. If we were to go back 10 years ago, General, I'm not going to ask you this, Microsoft always, would you be making as much money back then 10 years ago? And what is this whole business that we're talking about today of cybersecurity growing in relevance and price and consequence? If you had been doing this 10 years ago, I'm just interested, would you have been looked at as an oddity, as someone who's sort of a fig leaf for issues? How has the appreciation for cybersecurity and the staff member changed?
I think the biggest difference is that today, common articles, hear senior executives talk about, we can't look at cybersecurity as an IT issue. This is a strategic business issue, and we have to deal with it that way. And that's the same transition I saw working in the military when, in fact, that's how I went from being a boring fighter pilot to being a cool cyber guy. Was the 4-star admiral said, we can't look at IT and cybersecurity as a support function. This is critical to me being able to do our business. And so I think the biggest change is there's that acknowledgement. The challenge I see as I work with boards and do talks is we're not walking the talk yet. It's a lot of, hey, this is a strategic business issue, and the CIO is going to make it that way. The CEO really has to own that and change the culture. Right?
So you don't think we're there yet, that this arena is not elevated at the level that it needs to be to kind of be in that power track, leadership track, as fully as it should be?
Right. In my view, we're there certainly with awareness and understanding, and I think that that senior executives, C-suite members, board members that I talk to, they know they need to take this seriously, and they know that they need to understand it better. But if they don't know what questions to ask, and if they did ask the question, they don't understand the answer, and so it's going to take time on their part to understand the key terms and concepts, so they can have a conversation with the CIO or the CISO in the same way they have a conversation with the COO or the CFO. And the vast majority are nowhere close.
Angela, General's question, the answer is kind of scary because it gets at this issue we were discussing about literacy and about your world when you sort of look at Microsoft is, reminds me of Intel inside. Microsoft really inside everything. And to a certain degree, if there's not a vigilance, if there's not awareness, if there's not a sense of consequence for this profession, how do we change the incentive so that it's not only taken more seriously, but more people look at this as the track they want to be on, that they want to be in this industry?
Yeah, I would say my experience really mirrors Brett in some ways, because I've been working in cybersecurity for over 20 years. And in the beginning, as we talked about, it was a little bit of, please care about this issue, please. And now it's like everyone seems to care, but they don't know what to do yet. And I do think that there are more and more people who are interested in the field of cybersecurity, but I get a lot of questions, particularly from young people, about what is the track?
Right.
What do I need to do so that I can have a job in this? And they're looking for something very specific. They're looking for, should I be a computer engineering major, computer science major? And of course, STEM and focusing on the technical side is super important. But as you heard from what Brett just said about the board level conversations, this is not just a technical domain. We really need people who can think in a multidisciplinary way. We need people who are senior business leaders who can understand why cyber matters to their business function, not just from a technical side, but why it matters to their businesses. And we need a lot more side of creativity. This, if you get a whole room of people who all have scientific backgrounds together, they tend to think a lot alike. But when you see how malicious actors are operating, they have creativity in the mix. And so we really have to think about how to create a culture that cultivates those kind of multidisciplinary thinkers.
Are we doing that? And I want to ask this in a way because I know your partner, Keith Alexander. Well, I mean, when we hang out with you generals, you're so serious and like it's I want to sit up straight and be on time but the reality is that a lot of the hacking talent, new generation talent, the cyber talent, whether in offense or defense, are not particularly the kind of sit up straight, wear a coat and tie, clean cut type folk. And I'm interested when you talk about environments in this kind of nimble world, what's coming next, how do you see that element of talent, particularly, does the government need to loosen up a little bit in terms of figuring out how to bridge to a community that's certainly, not gonna be as military as you are?
Let me hit that from two aspects. Is one, I think there's plenty of skilled, talented, dedicated, committed people who can meet the military standards and want to serve in that capacity. So my personal opinion is I still want to look at them as an airman, a soldier, a sailor, a Marine first, and then I want them to have these skills and talent. But kind of the flip side, now that I've been in the private sector for 3 years working with a variety of these people, I'll give you, I think there's a little bit of a myth around this that's not necessarily true. I mean, millennials and the whole issue, and there's different, I got two at home, not at home anymore, thank goodness. But I've got two of those. One's actually on his way to be a fighter pilot, but I've got two of those. And there is still an element of structure that's required to get business done, and they appreciate it. And I'll give you one quick vignette. I've got a young man working for me. Used to work in the government. He's one of these people that looks like he fell down the stairs carrying a tackle box, right? It's what you think a hacker would look like. Yeah. And he came into my office the other day and he goes, I left the government because there was too much structure, too much process, he says, but I think we need some more process here. We're and so they see the need to be on time, to be responsive, to be reliable, all of those kind of things. And I don't think we should let people get away without functioning that way, because there has to be some discipline to the process to get business.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was maybe add in here, because I think the point that he's making is super important. One of the things that we've talked about is making sure you have a flexible work environment. Right. But a flexible work environment is not one that only allows for one type of behavior. I remember when I moved out to Redmond when I first joined Microsoft, and I moved here from Washington, D.C., and I was used to black, navy blue, and charcoal gray suits. And when I moved there, I was like, oh my God, what do I wear? But ultimately, over time, what I realized is a flexible work environment is not about norming to one thing. It's about creating an environment where people can feel comfortable and can be themselves. So for me, that wasn't about wearing Tevas and, being the person who drank, Gatorade or all those different things. It's about an environment that lets people be themselves and appreciates meritocracy, not about what you wear, where you work, or how you work, but what is your output? What are you contributing to the organization? And I think that that's really environment, not norming to one thing, but allowing people to be.
Brett, I know you give a speech out there on the road, sometimes called Defending the Nation in the Age of Cyberspace. And I've been thinking about that title. What are two or the three things you think we're not well enough at defending the nation that apply to this application of talent?
Yeah, I think there's three things. Number one, we still have to recognize that there is a significant gap in language perception and understanding between the government side, same on the business side, between the people who set policy and the people who technically understand this. So as a result, I've been in them and I've seen a lot of conversations.
So these are like boards of companies?
No, I'm talking about in the government.
Okay,
so I'm thinking about the people that do policy, let's say that, and the people that technically understand how to do this. This gap in language perception and understanding makes it hard for them to come to a single place, understand what risks we're taking, do those sorts of things. Right. There's a direct analog in business, okay? I think the second area that we've got to get our arms around is red lines and rules. We have still not established norms of behavior. We haven't established consequences. I've got a picture I use that shows me in 1987 on the wing of what was then a Soviet bomber. And back then, we knew exactly what the rules were. And if you crossed this red line, you would be met with unacceptable consequences. So we haven't established the rules. And then I think the third thing that is a challenge is that there's an issue of sovereignty out there, right? Cyberspace is everywhere. You kind of alluded to it before. So if I go in and change a 1 to a 0 on this lady's hard drive, have I violated her sovereign territory? And on one hand, you go, well, that's a stupid question. Actually, it's not really a stupid question. It's a valid question. And we haven't established the precedent for that. So I think those three areas is got to close the gap in language perception and understanding between the policymakers in government and the people that technically understand it. Okay, and then we've got to be able to understand the sovereignty issues there and apply.
Since you've kind of indirectly referred to the kind of the global setting of the boundless, boundlessness of these questions, I'd just like to ask you both, how good is the United States in this, or how bad they were compared to the Russians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Israelis? Where do we rank, really? And I mean, you think about that?
So I
You
think
worry
you have
about
to,
that? Should I be worried about that?
I think you have to think about it in a couple of contexts. You can think about technical capability, you can think about strategic capability, and then I also think relevant to the context of this discussion, you can think about it in terms of how countries are preparing the current and future workforce to deal with the technical strategic issues.
Right.
And I think you have to think about all of those. In the context of the last piece, when I really look at what's going on in the world, and I manage our global public policy work, so I talk with a lot of governments and a lot of companies about this issue. I think the United States, like many others, is thinking quite a bit about what that future workforce is. But I do think we have to work more on the question you asked earlier, which is incentivizing people into the field and allowing for this kind of creativity, excuse me, and culture in the environment. You know, when you think about the side of the strength of the military intelligence capabilities, I would certainly have my partner for an answer to that.
My comment would be that the United States is extremely capable. And, you know, there's usually you think of, I would say the United States and Russia and Israel are usually acknowledged as having the most significant technical capability. What I think we should all be concerned with as Americans is that clearly the Russians and the Chinese have decided where cyberspace operations fit in their national strategy and what they are willing to do. You know, I don't know any inside detail, but you know what I read in the media was in the fall there was about 2 months of deliberations before we decided to indict the Russians because we weren't sure that this executive order could be used to do that. I think the Russians or the Chinese are agonizing over executive orders before they decide to take actions in cyberspace.
So they've got doctrine and practice in place. We don't have doctrine and practice. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
They've certainly got practice in place because we've seen it. You know, and the Russians weren't doing cyber war. They were using cyber capability to conduct information warfare the same way they've done for decades. But the point is they've decided how they're going to do that, and they're establishing norms, I would argue. So we have to decide, and I think that it's more difficult for us in certain ways. There's a bit of the glass house syndrome in there that we have to be conscious of, and I think the United States also has a responsibility because we tend to set precedent. But I think precedent is being set for us. Don't get a little more aggressive.
You know, the other thing that I think is really important to raise on this point, because as you named the countries, I think those are countries that people tend to think about cyber power. But one of the things is the world is changing, and it's changing very rapidly. You have 2.5 or so billion people online right now. You're going to have another 2 billion people online within the next 5 years,
Right.
Almost doubling the global population. And this global population is coming on primarily from the South, from the global South. And so when you're thinking about those cyber powers and what are they doing technically, strategically, and in terms of the workforce, it is this globally interconnected society, and people are competing for the same talent pool, and the risks that are being highlighted here are not just coming from those cyber superpowers, it's coming from the behavior of individual users and companies from all around the world who don't have the same
Really?
practices or
Yeah.
norms that we might operate
Well,
with.
and that's a threat side. I mean, I actually think that's so important. When I think of a cyber superpower right now, I should add, you know, when I fascinated by is Estonia, right? Estonia, this small Baltic country that has done more than any other nation in the world, I think, completely envelop its market, its system, its defenses in a kind of, you know, intense cyber literacy and use that I find really formidable and impressive. And maybe they're just fooling me with good marketing, but it seems to me significant and an interesting model. I just ask you just real quickly, are there things they're doing when it comes to talent again, and that kind of when you see sort of all these stakeholders that come in to kind of create an eco bubble of of sort of a new world in kind of digital connectivity that we could learn from.
Yeah, it's really, first of all, I love that you bring that up. When I go to most places that you wouldn't consider a cyber superpower around the world, they're like, how do I become Estonia? They want, but it's not just in
It used to
terms
be how
of
we become Sweden. Now it's how do we become Estonia?
No, I'm not kidding. And it's not just from the offensive side or the projection of power, but ultimately they made a decision about 15 years ago that technology was going to be an economic generator different way. And so what they did was a couple of key projects. For example, they have a digital ID project that this digital identity allows people to pay taxes in a secure way, do parking, do prescriptions. So they both did technology projects, and then they started work in their K through 12 in order to help prepare people to leverage those capabilities. And so you see it as a really interesting where their economic output is very, very high relative to the number of people that they have because they have embraced technology.
Right.
I agree with everything that Angela said. I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to have lunch with the previous president of Estonia, and I think they have two advantages. One, they got whacked by the Russians pretty hard, so that provided additional impetus. But the other thing, talk about the gap in language perception and understanding. I could have I had a discussion with the president of Estonia at a much more technical level with a level of shared understanding than, frankly, I've seen with any board that I've worked with so far. And this was the president.
So literacy at the top.
He got it. And that's part of the leadership side of it, right? Leadership behavior sets organizational culture. From the president down, they're setting this culture that this is important. We're going to be literate in this. We're going to protect ourselves, but we're not going to be afraid. They didn't disconnect from the internet when they got hacked. They figured out, okay, how do we deal with it? No, by the way, all of those countries also have figured out how to deal with the information offensive from Russia. I mean, they're right there, and they've figured out how to tell the story of their own population. There's a lot of interesting lessons.
We were sitting back in the green room, and we had this interesting moment. I was scribbling down sort of discreetly what the general was saying, and then he kind of picked in this language. You know, when we're hiring hunters or defenders or TAOs, I'm like, what's a TAO? And it says, oh, I guess that's classified now, a tailored access operator. You know, I guess what I want to ask you is when you're looking at the skill sets for your hunters or defenders, and if I got this right, and you're in that world, I found it fascinating just the way you described. What were you saying as you're looking forward from this day forward? You're looking at as skill sets that people are saying you're looking for, and how, I mean, and give us a little kind of context for that weird moment.
I would pick up on exactly what Angela said, that fundamentally we want creative, smart people who are dedicated to what they're doing, right? They want to be part of the team. They want to play for the name on the front of the jersey, et cetera, et cetera. That's the number one thing I'm looking for. And then the second thing, the discussion we had back there was that a lot of people want the person that was the hacker, right? The person that worked in the government and did this hacking, or maybe they came out of Black Hat or something like that. And what I determined very early on was that I really want people to understand the offensive mindset, understand what it takes to do that. But you have to have somebody that's lived on the defensive side, because it's different tools, different capabilities, it's different rules. All of those things make the defense different. And ultimately, what I would like to have is somebody that's got pretty good experience in both, but I really want a lot of experience on the defense side and some experience over here. And the other thing is that, and I think Angela may want to pick up on this, is we have really seen, I'm looking for now, I think, a workforce that's about 1/3 older, like 30, and experienced. And then I'm looking for people that come out of the right programs at the right colleges where they've had people out doing internships. They understand how to apply what they're learning in school. Because what you have to be careful of is there's a lot of cybersecurity and computer science and DevOps programs out there, and very few of them effectively integrate, I would call it a culture of cybersecurity, into the curriculum. So you get developers who are awesome developers, but aren't thinking anything about security because they see security as a block.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, maybe 2 points, and I'll pick up on the second. But I want to make sure some people heard one of the things you said. You said we want people who can play on the team. I think one of the things that sometimes gets underestimated is the importance of people who know how to work in a teamwork environment. Right. You know, there is a lot of entrepreneurship in the ICT industry, and we love that, right? But entrepreneurship doesn't necessarily mean striving off all the way and working solely on your own. We need people who can work in teams, who can bring together different skills, and who have the communication that the general has highlighted, who know how to talk across environment. And as the other thing is this kind of what are the right credentials and qualifications? And one of the things I was editing something like 2 days ago where the paper was talking about building a cyber workforce. And it said something like, we're looking for people with the right degrees and the right certifications. And what I added, and I think this is the point, is degree, certification, and
Right.
Experience should not be underestimated. This culture of cybersecurity where you have people who can think with different lenses is oftentimes something that is gained through experience. And one should not underestimate how experience is a qualification equal, if not sometimes better, than just credentials.
And if I could add in there, you'll see a lot of things, and there's a lot of debate now whether a degree makes any difference, if you've got 20 certifications from SANS, all of that. And I don't think you can discount either one of those. There's a level of critical thinking, and there's a level of teamwork and a level of communication you develop, I think, from going and getting a degree. There's
Right.
a level of baseline expertise you get from these certifications, but it's exactly what Angela said. You know how to apply it. Have you had the opportunity to get the experience, and have you really made use?
Just before we go to the audience, one of the areas of preparation out there are kind of classic higher education institutions, and I've talked to a number of these. Some are very innovative on how they're creating programs, how they're bringing and trying to deal with some of the imbalances, gender imbalances, and to create a more inclusive track for folks in this cyber arena as well. But if you were to critique, if we were to make you super powerful, say you get a chance to recreate, change how higher education is the world fits with your needs and what you think are important, what would you do, General?
Yeah, I think I would look at MBA programs, public policy programs, international relations programs. These are all the people that are going to be, those are the business leaders, those are the leaders in this town working on congressional staffs, eventually getting their way to the NSC. I would be going in a very thoughtful way to think about how do I integrate this let's just call it cyber literacy, in a way that's going to be useful for them. A little bit of technical stuff they need to know, but they really need to know, how do I do risk management with cyberspace? Because that's
Right.
fundamentally what this is, right? Will be a contested environment forever. Whether it's a business or a country, it's a risk management problem. And so getting those type of programs with that integrated. And then the other side I'm very concerned with is what I mentioned before, is I've talked to a number of people that work in computer science programs, or have taught computer science programs, and you'll hear there's no room in the curriculum to talk security. That's crazy. Then you need to alter the curriculum, because there's some stuff you're talking about that isn't near as important as security. Those are
Interesting. Yes.
Two things, and I think the point is, and I've said it already, we're looking for people who can teach us. So a couple of things. It's the integration of the people who are taking computer engineering and computer science, getting exposure to a public policy class, but getting exposure in the context that will help your job. That's the really important thing. You don't want your MBA major taking necessarily a coding class. What they need to know is what a coder does, if they're using secure development practices, how that applies to the mission of the company. And so it's not just take a class from another major. It's actually being able to create that integration in a context that is meaningful to the role that you're in. And then the second thing is apprenticeship. Making sure that you have an opportunity to go into an applied environment, whether or not that applied environment is consistent with your job. So taking the CompE person and having them work over at the Department of Justice on what's going on in the law enforcement environment, that starts to help get people who can think in a horizontal way. Cyber is something that is fundamentally horizontal. The world is built around vertical sector, vertical business units. But this issue in a risk management context crosses across all those environments. So that's the kind of thing that, if king for a day, I would decide.
Fascinating. Well, let me open up to all of you. Wow, we have lots of questions. Go here and we'll go on. Hey, Mitzi, how are you?
Hi, Krista Twomey, American University, and an economist, so this is why I'm focusing on incentives.
Right.
My question goes to your culture aspect. What role do you see for legislation or culture that creates a more whistleblower type environment so that companies or employees that recognize breaches feel much more comfortable sharing them without concerns about liability issues?
Great question. Quick answer, General.
Yeah, I think culture is extremely important in a number of aspects with this, and I think that's one of them. How do I incentivize employees to raise issues that they're concerned about? And the most important one is insider threat. How do I get employees to say, hey, Sue or Jim doesn't seem to be their normal self? It's a people problem first. That's where the insider threat comes from. So I think the culture that encourages everybody and rewards people for bringing up issues that demonstrate we're at risk, and then we make a decision on how we deal with that.
And I think the Pentagon kind of did that, right? They set up a system that actually gave financial incentive, found these vulnerabilities.
That's a little different. That's a bug bounty
Oh,
program.
that's a bug bounty program?
Yeah,
This is a different sort of thing?
This is a different thing. This is how do you
Breaches.
incentivize employees to raise a red flag and say, hey, I think we have a problem here that's not correct.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hank Wallace of Write and Speak Like the News. Show us how to think in a multidisciplinary way, Angela, to get people to visualize this amorphous area of cybersecurity. Steve, you mentioned offense, defense. That makes me think of sports. Is that the analogy that will get some people to get realizing that it's not just a question of security of defense? We can be ultimately defensive and have no use of the internet, or the opposite, an open internet, but be overrun, be sacked with
So
bad defense.
I'm going to cut it off there because we're nearly out of time. But Angela, how do you tell the story?
Yeah, I think, and we were talking about this a little bit in the back, which is, there are no singular analogies, but there is a conversation about balancing offense and defense. And I think in the context of looking at cybersecurity, you really do have to work in terms of creating and understanding the societal impacts that are associated with this interconnected system. And that's one of the things that I think really globally people are struggling with, whether you're talking with public policymakers or you're talking with security researchers, hacker community. People don't necessarily understand the role of the other and why something exists. This is often references the East-West, the East Coast versus West Coast, or the technical versus the board. And then one of the things I try and highlight is not one or the other, but having the two talk to each other.
And go ahead, General.
Yeah. At the end of the day, it's a people problem, right? Technology is going to change. People, leadership, culture, that's what's agnostic of the.
And real quickly right here, we'll just, I know I'm leading the time here, but real quick here, real fast question.
Thanks very much. I'll be real quick. You mentioned, Angela, the importance of experience when you're hiring someone. And I was thrilled to hear you mention apprenticeship. I think that's a great road to getting there. But the trick is, how do you make the business case to a board, for example, that you want to invest in training? So you have this newly mentored cybersecurity employee who's now looking at an extremely lucrative market. How do you make the case that that training internally is worthwhile when you may lose them once you have trained them?
Don't answer yet. Right? Wait. 15 seconds here. Go fast.
I'm Mitzi Worth. I'm with the Naval Postgraduate School. I've been a part of the technology game since the very beginning because I was the first female political appointee at the Navy 40 years ago.
15
But
seconds.
hang on. Apple Computer has an absolutely fabulous line, which is, if you don't know, ask. We all learn together. I can't tell you how many hours I've sat in meetings and nobody asks the question, but they don't understand what's being said. And so they walk out, post it.
Okay. Thank you, Mitzi. So, so apprenticeships, I guess the culture of inquiry, if I may, and then finally, what I want to ask you as we just close out here, I'm interested in the audit area of once you develop this talent, you have this talent, you have that person at the National Security Agency or somewhere in the government that's trained well. How do you retain over the long run, and is that a concern? And is it good to actually create these engines of training that then go seep out through the system? Is that a good thing or bad? So why don't we just finish up, General?
I think you just have to accept the fact that this is a very mobile workforce, where you're talking about in the military, you're talking about in the private sector. You're going to bring people in, you're going to have to train them, you're going to get them up to speed, you're going to develop them. I think you should assume they're going to stay forever. We got a startup, we hire 6 interns this summer. So you have to cultivate this force. and just assume that 50% are going to be gone in 2 years and understand that I've got to feed this pipeline. So I think in the government or the private sector, mobile workforce, train them like they're going to be there forever, because if you can look at it altruistically, you're going to create people for the greater good, but you just got to that. And
Yeah, in terms of the case for training, I think really it's about making sure that the leadership is setting a environment that recognizes both near-term and long-term impacts. You know, this is where you see organizations who are successful in the long run. You want to make sure that I talk about this with my folks today, right? I need to show that you're having direct impact on the business now. We're going to take care of the core, but at the same time, we're going to enable you to do things that are going to stretch, because that's going to be long-term growth pack, and the impact the company is going to be. On the retention point, I think, again, that having a flexible work environment is incredibly important. You know, I hate the phrase work-life balance because it doesn't make any sense, but one of the things that I really appreciate at Microsoft, tech industry, is having this ability to do work-life integration. That it doesn't matter always where I'm at, and it doesn't matter that it's always 9 until 7, because yes, we're a company, but rather what I'm actually doing in terms of the impacts, and am I there when I need to be there? It really incentivizes people to come and to stay.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give a hand to Angela McKay of Microsoft and Major General Brett Williams of IronNet Cyber. Thank you so much.